Hi, and welcome to You're Gonna Love This, the tech podcast with a sexy European twist. I'm your co-host, Dustin Robinson, and today we're shaking it up again. Instead of doing deep dives, we are doing another interview. This time, I'm sitting down with Natalia Arcila Barbour, a international management consultant focusing on things like marketing, strategy, business transformation, and now, most recently, AI. We had a great conversation covering her visit to Davos a few weeks ago, as well as what it's like to try and get a company to successfully adopt and roll out AI and how to make it work. I really enjoyed this conversation. I think you will as well. Let's go. Natalia, welcome to You're Gonna Love This.
Thank you very much, Dustin. It's a pleasure to be here.
I have been very excited for this interview. You have done a lot of international work doing consulting with a big marketing focus. And then you recently went to Davos for the first time, which is what got me excited about talking to you because it's always an interesting event. And this year has been particularly interesting. The first take, what are your thoughts on Davos now that the dust has settled a little bit and some of the headline grabbing things may have faded into the background?
It's really interesting, Dustin, as you say, this one in particular. I was there last year and I was lucky enough to be there this year. But the shift in the view on technology and how the world is really becoming very uncertain is really the first year where this was solidified into Davos as a certainty. And
That
that
uncertainty is
discussion,
the certainty.
yeah. And ironically, actually, to that point, what a lot of investors were saying, I was in events, you've got the political side, you've got comm side, you've got a lot of events on the side, roundtables, panels, etc. But the key takeaway with a lot of investors and their sentiment is what we have lived in the past years of certainty and stability is odd. And where we are now of what they now call the VUCA world. I don't know if you've heard that
No, I
before.
haven't. What is the VUCA world?
VUCA is a terminology that was coined a few months ago or a while back, describing the world, the new normal we are living in, which is volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And the sentiment now is really this is here to stay. And what we've lived in the past is an exception. So that's where that is the big takeaway that we need to really think about ourselves and in businesses is how do we stop reacting so viciously to changes and rather becoming flexible and adaptable to the shifts that are ongoing.
Really interesting. And so what would you characterize as maybe some of the old ways that businesses or even governments have responded to stuff that simply don't fit with this VUCA world we're in?
Well, I think from a strategic perspective where I sit and advise my clients a lot, I think things have changed when you're planning. For example, on a very simple perspective, of course, we have long-term plans, but what we really want to focus on now that is really being talked about, you've got the big McKinsey's writing about it, you've got big organizations thinking about it. HBR came out with an article about it, is scenario planning. How do you prepare your business? How do you prepare your teams to understand all the options that might happen and be prepared for all those alternatives? So I think that's one thing that has really shifted and needs to continuously start changing in our mindset. We can't have just one way of thinking. We need to have that flexibility in the way we plan, and we need to have that flexibility in the way we, more importantly, as leaders, react. And I think one of the things that we find can be a risk is that if leaders constantly react and businesses react holistically to changes, what we're going to see is that it's going to break the business as opposed to shift things because you're going to react, you're going to shift teams, strategies, ways of working, and then suddenly you're going to have to change direction again.
Yeah.
And so that abrupt way of approaching that style we used to have where we said, okay, now we've got COVID, now we've got crises, now we've got this shift. We're going to have to be more almost elastic So we allow for those changes to bounce off of us instead of break us.
And are there any businesses today that you think have already figured this out a little bit, or is everyone still in the starting blocks?
Well, I think of course, in general, everybody's on the starting blocks when we talk about the biggest shift under our feet, which is AI.
Yeah.
I do think there are companies that are more ahead of the game, others, whether it's because of budgets, whether it's because of size and agility, and they might be smaller, or whether it's because it's incumbent businesses versus new businesses that are coming in. And, their bricks are no longer bricks, they're tech stacks on AI. And so they're a lot more agile and they're already ahead of the game, even though they're new in the market.
Mm.
But I do think that we're all at the start. And the biggest thing, your challenges that really were taken away with all these conversations in Davos was that, you know, this adoption of technology, it's not just another addition to our toolkit. We're facing what they call, we're calling it industrial revolution. And actually, there was a professor in Stanford that said it's not an industrial revolution because revolutions happen over time.
Yeah.
And we haven't had time for this to happen. So really what we're seeing is unprecedented. But in any case, this is reshaping economies, societies, nations, the macro of how nations are now working on trade or relationships are a lot more transactional and objective than the big relationships that were established before. And, just because you're a big ally or long-term relationship, we're going to be closer to you. Now it is very objective. And I think that shift, the old playbooks aren't working anymore. And a lot of businesses are on the cusp of understanding that.
Mm.
I think there are two ways to look at this when you come from businesses and within your own teams is, you need a bold vision of your future. And you need to have the right technology. Within the right technology, you need to have your right data. Once you have the right data, you need to have that talent and that culture. And then when you spin all that together, that creates simultaneously the ability to change. So without those ingredients, what you find is that a lot of businesses are implementing things on a team by team basis, very myopically, function by function, process by process. And that's not going to cut it because working in silos doesn't. And a big highlight, and I think one of the takeaways that I saw from all these discussions at Davos
Hmm.
was we're talking about the technology, we're talking about the implementation, the what ifs, what is the future going to look like? But it's here. And Emma Chalwin, who's the CMO of Workday, and makes sense because obviously it's a talent
Yeah.
platform.
So very
But she
sensitive
said,
to labor force changes.
exactly. And, her point was wait a second. The part that everyone is missing here when it comes to effective technology shift and AI implementation is a leadership problem. It's not a technology.
Mm.
The way it was discussed is we're talking about the tech and but we're not talking enough about the people. And when it comes to implementing something so unknown to us in businesses, it's a co-creation. And very few people addressed this over the conversations.
Yeah.
How do there's a fear, as you can imagine, Dustin, I'm sure you've got it at work where, what is AI going to do to my job?
So it's really interesting on that with as you're talking about these fears and the executives' interactions. I don't know if my employer Malt is a little bit different where I'm not seeing that much fear there, but I am seeing it elsewhere quite loudly. And one of the things that I wonder is that connects that with what you shared about it's a leadership problem, not necessarily a tech problem, especially because AI is new and people are trying to figure it out, is there's a lot of kind of early data and reporting coming out talking about how executive optimism and expectations around AI is very different from a few layers down in the organization. Like Wall Street Journal published something a few weeks ago about how executives found it was saving them a ton of time and were using a lot, whereas people with other types of work said it wasn't effective at all. Are you seeing that either in the consulting work you're doing with companies or just what you're seeing at Davos, where there's a bit of a mismatch between key decision makers and their expectations and the people doing a lot of work on the ground?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, my view, and I think this is generally shared as well, is that AI implementation and AI programs fail not because of technology constraints, but because of the governance that's misaligned. I think actually before even going into governance and when it is implemented into businesses, we take a step back because I'm a consulting partner at a business called the Agentics, which is AI solutions implementation into businesses. And what we find is when we're pitching to companies that want to know, we need AI, but we don't know why, which is most companies
Yeah.
here in the Europe. And there's actually data behind it to say, there's a huge percentage of businesses that say we need it, but we don't quite know where and we don't know how. And so that is daunting. And when we're pitching and we're giving information about what are the AI solutions, the transformations that we can help with, they don't even understand what we're pitching.
Mm.
So, first of all, there needs to be an education
Yeah.
before even the governance side. And that education comes with case studies, it comes with understanding what others are doing. So, it is a slow process. But then, what you were saying, there is a complete misalignment indeed when if you implement AI programs, for example, purely from the top down, it becomes an abstract strategy theater. And when it's purely bottom up, it turns into disconnected pilots.
Mm.
So the compounding advantage really emerges when strategic intent and operational intelligence are structurally integrated. What I mean with that is AI only works when you're co-creating across the organization.
Yeah.
Leadership drives it from the top down. They need to shift that mindset. They need to define that strategic blueprint and clarify how it supports the business ambition. But at the same time, the functional experts must shape the executional layer because they're the ones that uniquely understand the inefficiencies, how augmentation creates leverage, or where AI can actually meaningful enhance decision making or speed or quality,
Yeah.
unlike leaders that aren't in that detail. So I think there needs to be, yeah, that change in mentality. I don't know if the US has seen it, but in Europe, that's where we're at.
Yeah. And I think it's happening everywhere, but in Europe, I'm noticing it quite a bit as well. That's also where our network is, so that's not too crazy. A follow-up question on that, because I've seen some criticisms, mainly just online with people posting stuff on different social channels, is that executives are a little bit more wowed by AI for a couple of reasons. One being they're not using it as intensely because most of their work is kind of in meetings and coordination and decision making and stuff like that. So they don't have to deal with perhaps things that look more like work slop where it's just not really well produced. And then where AI already has easy, strong use cases today is in automating some of the smaller tasks that executives are more likely to have to deal with, meeting summaries, organizing information, stuff like that. Whereas people on the front lines have to deal with stuff that's more complex that AI might not be ready for. Do you think that criticism is fair and part of the problem? Or do you think that there's just a fundamental misunderstanding on the front line for employees as well, where it can do actually a lot and they're just not ready to use it the right way?
I think it's a bit of both. I do think certainly when you operate at a strategic level, there are a lot of other elements that you're integrating into your thinking that AI might not necessarily, in your first interaction with AI, spit it out. I think that the use and the correct use of AI, so I'm not fully in agreement with that leadership level because if you learn to train and to support with the right data, the right background information, AI can support decision making.
Mm,
Absolutely. Not only can it support it, but it can challenge. And I think this is where we used to be before. Leaders would see black and white and they would go down route A or route B.
yeah.
But AI now is posing, well, did you think about route C and D and E? Or is this the direction, you're going for? Because if you look at it in the long term. So that analytical side on the strategic level, I think when used properly, when the data is inputted correctly and it has enough context, can absolutely support almost fully at a leadership level. And then separately, when you come to that executional level, yes, people are using it for those nuanced jobs that come out and they can easily supplement or substitute with AI. But I think the problem is, again, we're going back to that data.
Mm.
If we don't have the correct state of data, if we don't have that cleanse, or if we don't understand what we're feeding exactly, we're going to be asking AI questions. We're going to be getting answers. And that's fine because that's the efficient part. We're going to get the answer a lot faster than
Yeah.
we had it or the solution. But the problem is going to be we're going to go back and fact check it, double check it because we don't trust AI.
I've had
And
too
we
many
don't
bad
trust it.
responses to stuff. I'm one of those
Yeah,
people.
exactly. And so it, you can work around it to avoid hallucinations,
Mm.
to double check its work, and to double check the data that you're inputting. And I think that's when you start building trust in AI, is when you know that what it's being fed on is accurate and correct. And then, it's interesting. Julie Lin, she's EY, a global vice chair of ecosystems
Hmm.
and alliances. And I used to work with her back in my days in Hong Kong, and she was there at Davos. And she gave us an interesting set of data points where she said 40% of people are using AI. They're saving time, right? Sanity, 40% of people are using AI, and then they're spending their time sanity checking at what AI did, which is what we just discussed.
Mm.
But that's not productivity. She was saying this is the proof that we haven't figured out the human part. And ultimately, what they say is, I can't remember the exact data. She said it was like, if you train your employers for 80 hours, you're saving 14 hours a week of work.
Mm.
But 12% of the workforce has been trained. So, I think that if you combine that human part, that data part, and ultimately what everybody's talking about, trust, that's where it can be more or less efficient, no matter if you're at that leadership level or at that execution level. But you need that clarity, that transparency of the trust that you have in it.
Yeah. Oh, super interesting.
That was a long answer to your
It was a
to
good
your
one. It was a
question.
good answer. It was
There
a
you
good
go.
answer. One more follow up on the AI thing, and then I want to circle back to some other Davos questions.
Hmm.
What about employee resistance and fear of job loss? Like, the labor market's a little weird right now. We're not seeing any evidence to suggest that AI job loss is happening. Everybody's worried about it. You'll see anecdotal stuff, and companies are using it mostly as a reason for why they're cutting jobs, but most economists are saying it appears to be more of a smokescreen. That could change, of course. There's always new data coming out. But a lot of employees are very suspicious and worried about this. Do you think that that is a legitimate fear? And what can employers do to address it?
I think, like every revolution, things will die away, roles will die away. They'll be replaced by new roles that will, take up the technology that we are now working with. And I do believe that we have a overlap of people that are coming out from colleges and universities at the moment that aren't quite trained because we've just had this shift under our feet, and people that are coming right behind those that will be trained. And so there will be a gap
Mm.
of skills whereby people won't be able to fit them because as leadership or as people that are already in the workforce, we're trying to keep up. And then the people that are actually being trained in education still work, still studying, still have a way to go to come into the workforce. So yes, I think there is that risk in
Mm.
the gap where people may lose jobs. We're not only talking about AI. I mean, we're looking at robotics
Yeah.
when you're looking at the tertiary industries and how that's completely blown it out. But I do think that we then will catch up, and that's on the skill set. On the leadership mindset and what employers should be looking at, really it's what we were saying before around how do you create trust in what's coming, and you help people understand that they are part, or you as leadership should understand that your people are part of the role in successfully embedding these technologies into the business. Because as a leader, you will see a completely different scope and vision of how that technology is going to affect your business. But then when it comes to the implementation, again, you have an executional workforce that needs to be the driver of how you do it. So it's kind of the what and the how. And if you as an employer aren't helping them, first of all, aren't changing your mindset to say, wait a second, let's not talk about technology substituting. Let's talk about technology complementing. That's the what. And then the how, I need my workforce to be the expert to tell me where best to position it. So I think that mindset needs to be important for the employer to build then trust in the employee to say, hey, you're the expert here. Help me co-create the implementation of this technology into our business. Here's the vision. Now you give me the execution.
Yeah.
So, it's a double-edged sword. Of course, every shift in evolution comes with death in a way, but also we catch up and we evolve very quickly as the very adaptable humans we are.
Yeah. So you're feeling a lot more optimism than other people are feeling.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think it is. There's a lot of fear. There are a lot of hurdles in big businesses to get through. Budgets. What if this fails? What are silos going to, how are they going to be broken down? So it's more about our mindset rather than whether the technology is working or not. That's how I see it.
And I find your take on that really interesting because I feel like you have articulated, and mind you, this is part of your job. You consult companies on this, a path forward to make it work. So I really like that take because usually it's either, oh, everything will be fine, or everything's going to blow up and it will be terrible.
I was remembering somebody at one of the panels in Davos that said, AI is not going to change. Take, for example, my area where it's strategy and brand and go to market. The fundamentals of brand building, promise, purpose, performance, all these pillars create trust and they haven't changed and they won't change.
Yeah.
The distinction with AI is that the creative processes can be automated, but creativity can't. So we need to find that perfect balance where we're saying, okay, it's the process, it's not the people, or it's not the creativity, it's not how we look at it that it's gonna change. It's just the way we're gonna do things.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm a very positive person in general, but I am very positive toward this development and very excited. It's just a matter of mindsets.
I want to circle back to Davos because one of the hot topics, of course, is sovereignty, especially with the US being in a peculiar place at the moment. Mark Carney had his speech that got a lot of attention. Emmanuel Macron also got a lot of attention for his speech and his sunglasses. From the business side, how are people thinking about this big technological sovereignty push? Because the sovereignty part is covering military and a lot of trade and a lot of other things, but tech is a huge component of that.
Yeah, I mean, it's very divided. Obviously, Europe is never always going to be a unified mindset, but the dependencies that the European Union has in relation to, the technology, defense is guided by our central government, but very divided and very debated. So I think, I made a mention earlier, the transactional outlook of how, Mark Carnegie, as he said, we're in a rupture. And now this rupture, he's talking about how we need new allies, new ways of working in a way, and new relationships. And the conflicts that we've seen in Europe have created a new outlook on how to do business differently. Take, for example, with the Russian war, new ways of finding energy resource, whether it was new alliances and partnerships, whether it was through a new type of energy of renewables and how we're investing more in that. And I think there's also a discussion on the amount of investment going into the startup world and the smaller businesses.
Yeah, with the 28th regime finally getting fast tracked.
Yeah, exactly. And Europe is there to help habilitate that. And so, for example, Ursula von der Leyen announced during Davos how they were going to speed up the creation of businesses online that were going to be EU businesses under an EU structure. So you didn't have to go country by country to set up a business and a regulation from a regulatory standard,
Yeah.
into France and then go in and Chamber of Commerce in Spain, and then how is it going to look in the Netherlands? Rather, it's going to take less than 48 hours. You're going to set up your business and you're going to be on the roll, and it's going to be a unified EU considered business.
Yeah.
So it's interesting how those shifts are working, and they're helping growth in places and businesses that might not have had it before.
Yeah. One question for you, since you're sometimes advising companies, not just on strategies, but I'm guessing also sometimes on which products or services they want to use. There are debates around the sovereignty movement, and there's actually been some first moves at the European level, I think yesterday, around exploring some mandatory minimum usages of European tech companies. So, with exploring that, one of the dilemmas is the fact that a lot of the European tech alternatives are not always as good as the American options, either because of price or because of feature sets. What's your take on how you advise customers on the choices they should make for those tools? Because a lot of Europeans are worried about being over dependent on American businesses, but also don't really want to sacrifice quality or pay too much. And then the European businesses argue, we can't even get a foot in the door to improve in the first place. So a lot of things coming together. What's your
Absolutely.
take on that?
I think normally my position here is let's look at what your end goal is
Mm,
and how can we achieve this equally through the unknown with a little bit more risk here at home in Europe,
yeah.
or with what you already know cost. And so I think a lot of times what it requires is similarly to what we were talking about, case studies in AI. You need to understand what is being offered first and what the quality of that offering is. And sometimes there are, people have a preconception of this is coming from a company in Spain and it's not the same as an American company. Of course, that can be the case.
Mm,
But what we're also seeing is that the offerings are becoming more niche, and companies are becoming less big and more niche
yeah.
as opposed to the bigger companies. And so, you know, a lot of this in the consulting world, for example, you see that the offerings that the big four are doing are being challenged at price, at speed, and at quality by smaller consultancy firms that call themselves the anti-consultancy firms.
Yeah.
And it's about educating the end user to say, right, your end goal is X. These people can do exactly that. You don't know them, but let's look at what they've done and see that kind of, contrast in what they're able to deliver. And it always takes a leap of faith, but I don't think that the quality is different. I think there are bigger budgets, there's bigger comms, bigger companies can be out there, especially in the US side. And they have had time to grow reputationally in their brands. But that doesn't take away that smaller businesses that are leaner, are more agile, therefore can be cheaper. Cheaper doesn't mean quality is worse.
Yeah.
It means they're actually focusing on something very niche, which is exactly what you need. So normally that's the direction I tend to go to is right, let's look at our options.
Mm,
And of course it takes a leap of faith, but it's also a matter of understanding who you're going to work with and what they've worked with in the past.
yeah. Are there any European players across any kind of tech space? It could be AI, MarTech, CRMs, whatever, that you think are overlooked compared to their American peers that are just as good, if not better?
I wouldn't be able to, I wouldn't want to name.
Damn it! I was hoping to rope
But
you into naming some
no,
names.
I can't.
Yeah, it's a professional
But
hazard.
absolutely. I think the space is highly competitive. I think when you're looking at specific countries, countries will guide you toward their expertise.
Mm.
So, for example, if you're looking into fintech and payments, the UK, the Netherlands is hugely advanced.
Yeah.
Technology and manufacturing, Germany is at the forefront. So, a lot of times these niches come out of their geographical remits and their expertise, and they compete among each other. And so it creates a little hub for that sort of, new technology. But what's interesting is the vast growth that we're starting to see in non-European countries where, for example, I think it was yesterday I was watching something where they were talking about how in Kazakhstan they're creating a huge hub of technology. And, they've got a lot of investment power.
Hmm.
And, Kurdistan is another one. So it's interesting to see how, Europe is there, but it will be challenged. The Middle East is another one where, out of Dubai and
There's a
Saudi,
lot of
there are
money
some
being
big
invested in the
AI
Middle East.
companies. Yeah. Yeah. And there's some big AI and tech and, all sorts of MarTech coming out of there that would definitely challenge what we have now.
Mm.
Every day is going to change now.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. And one of the things that I've talked about with other parts of this show with my co-host is the fact that limitations are a liability until they become an asset. For instance, one of the executives over at Mistral, France's frontier AI company, talked about how having too many GPUs makes you lazy, which has allowed them to innovate in some niche areas in the space.
Yeah, exactly. It's very interesting. I mean, watch the space because the niche is what I think really sells now.
Yeah.
Even, 2 years ago, trying to position myself as an expert and, coming from very big generalist roles, I thought that's it. It's my doom if I can't differentiate myself. And, another thing that we're talking more and more about especially in strategy and go to market is we're not talking about hyper personalization. We're talking about micro personalization. Like people want exactly what they want and they want someone that can exactly provide that.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the huge competitive market is going to come. You can see it in the banking industry as well,
Mm.
how the neobanks and the digital banks have really overridden the big incumbents and have shifted the ground they're on.
Yeah. Yeah. It's moving very quickly there. You saying that gives me a question I want to ask that kind of combines your marketing expertise, your insights into the AI and tech space, and then also some of the things you heard at Davos. There's a lot of optimism and excitement about what's happening with AI. However, AI amongst quote the normal people, whatever that means, is really unpopular. There's a lot of polling, more so in the US than in Europe, that people are not actually big fans of these tools. And you're seeing a lot of pushback against data centers. In the US, this is more connected to not in my backyard or NIMBYism, where people frequently just don't want it near their home. Whereas in Europe, for instance, in Amsterdam, where there's real constraints on the electricity network. For instance, it just came out that Microsoft used kind of a backdoor to sneak away to get a massive data center in Amsterdam by framing it as three small separate ones. So there's a serious risk of some political backlash. What do you think these different technology companies need to do to properly address these concerns? Because the financial decision makers are all on board, so they can make money from it. But if there's too much opposition at an electoral level and eventually at a consumer level, the music stops.
It's a very tough balance. I mean, I think that we just saw, you know, this little tricky move on behalf of Microsoft and obviously there are a lot of people that are not happy with it. I think the question is how we build a narrative around the greater impact that this is
Mm.
creating across the globe. And this is not end users that are using AI day in, day out. This is about how are we automating in the healthcare space, for example, or how are we bringing in support to really help us move forward in cancer research or, so there's a greater good that I think we need to move away from that myopic view of, the amount of energy being used and how that's going to affect. It is, however, concerning when, you have limited space and and limited energy in your country. I mean, personally, I just got back from Iceland. So
Mm.
there is a lot of opportunity
There's a
up
lot of
there.
space and
And I'm
a
very
lot of green energy.
well, and I'm surprised that those discussions haven't happened because it's generally a cold country. So the cooling of the technology, that is something that comes hand in hand. They have geothermal energy, which is basically free. So I think that it's also up to us to think more out of the box and obviously, think what are the alternatives out there that we could be thinking about to help not in my backyard, but it's gonna happen. How are we gonna do it? Obviously, I mean, it's beyond my knowledge, but, the power that the governments have and huge agreement that Saudi just put in to have, I don't know how many, you know, technology storage, I'm trying to remember what the official word is, anyway, hosted by them,
Hmm.
you know, it's political. I mean, I don't think at this point it's about practicality
Yeah.
and where it should go. It's more about who's paying and where the relationship is and how that agreement took shape. So beyond our control, unfortunately.
Yeah. It's with other powers that be. Last question for you. As someone who is a bit of a globetrotter, has worked with companies all around the world, what would you say is the main thing in today's climate that is separating European businesses from the rest, both the good and the bad, especially in tech? What's separating the European technology space from other spaces, particularly the US?
I think there's several elements. There's regulatory, which is a big one, and the EU can be more or less flexible and therefore allow for more, technology development or restrictions versus the US, for example. I think the mindset is
Mm.
also very important, the cultural mindset when we're looking at what is the adoption rate of the population across. Yesterday I was reading something around the geographical adoption rate by country in Europe and also the demographic adoption rate,
Europe
mostly
has one of
men.
the highest
Uh,
adoption rates of AI.
yeah. And I think that is also very much down to curiosity, down to educational systems and their
Mm.
flexibilities. I know, my mother owns a school in Madrid called Maxwell, and they're implementing AI in the way of thinking. They have an essay and they've got, okay, kids, I want you to give me 3 versions of that essay created by AI, and I want you to critically think where the gaps are. And so, you know, to be able to change country by country because it is at that level, the educational system very agilely. You're not talking about a whole EU imposition. You're talking about each country being able to change that with that mindset. That's going to accelerate the way, kids come out and their mindsets and with technology. So, you know, one of the data pieces they were saying is that the biggest adoption rate comes from 18 to 24-year-olds,
Mm.
which was my surprise because I thought the age was going to be a lot higher. But this is showing you that it's almost a cultural curiosity that's been instilled one way or
Or a
another,
desire to cheat on your
uh,
homework.
or or to but university students are the ones that are using it the most. Then speaking to someone, that was in a British school, in a British university, she was saying, we're limited with how we use AI. And actually, it's not necessarily seen as something positive to be using it.
Mm.
So all of these things, I think, affect how tech is adopted. And regulation, government funding, all of that is going to shift the way Europe is focused on tech, and they're developing quite quickly. And I don't know about the US, but I'm sure that that cultural mindset, that regulatory mindset, that financing mindset is very different. And so those two things will really shift the way things are being approached region by region.
Yeah. Natalia, this has been great. Do you have any final takes, anything you want to share to close us out?
No, I think it's been an absolute pleasure. I think what's really interesting is to see what's going to happen. And I think, keeping that mindset open and curiosity coming, and of course what we've been seeing, robustness and resilience, which is something that we already need to have implemented in ourselves. Uh, this is the way forward with all this. So let's cross our fingers and see nothing blows up.
At a bare minimum, it won't be boring.
Absolutely.
All right. Thanks, Natalia.
Thank you so much, Dustin. Been great.
That was the show. Thanks everybody for listening. We hope you enjoyed it. As always, please don't forget to leave us a rating on the platform of your choice wherever you find us. And don't forget to tell a friend. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.